So, hero, your journey for knowledge has brought you to this point, has it? All about you is an ancient, ruined library, lost to antiquity, but not to your quest. As you walk through the halls, you see that the walls have been smashed asunder, much like a child bored with his toys might do in an errant passing wave of his hand. You walk through these aisles. Even though the various shelves have been preserved by ancient enchantments, you see tomes, scrolls, even ancient clay tablets covered with arcane writing and cuneiform. Though you do not understand many of the languages that these tomes and these works have been penned in, you still feel some sort of a kinship or a link to these works. As you progress, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You feel something approaching, something malevolent. And that's when you hear the skittering, the scratching that comes out from all sides of you. You look around, to your left, to your right, and you see, in every gap between books, in every crack and every crevice, golden-shelled scarabs crawl forth, their black glittering eyes locked upon you. I assure you their intentions are not friendly. So, with no other option, the horde is too vast for you to fight, you run, letting them crawl after you in a majestically flowing carpet of beetles hungry for flesh. As you run, perhaps it is instinct, or maybe just a divine guidance that causes you to shoot your hand out towards one rack of scrolls, pulling forth an ancient, yellowing, disintegrating scroll wrapped in a curling purple ribbon. As you turn a corner, you see that the circle is now complete. The wall of scarabs, the expanse, spreads before you. The creatures crawl to the shelves on either side, and of course the host behind you is still there as well. You rip the purple ribbon off, and having no other choice, you look at the 3 words of power imprinted upon the scroll. In order to survive, you must repeat after me these words of power. The first is Owa. The second, Tana. The third, Siam. Did you say those words? The beetles are still there. You'll have to say the words again, but faster, with more force behind the words. Go ahead, I'll wait. Still there? Say them one more time, more quickly. Almost as if they were one sentence. Just say it out. Very good. I hope you can hear yourself. With that, the library quickly becomes a blur, and you find yourself transported once more. A feeling of knowledge resonates in your head. Perhaps you've gained what you sought. But more importantly, when you come to your senses, you find that once more, you are in the Lair of OmnusI. Greetings, heroes. Welcome once again to the Lair of OmnusI, and in this festive season, a very happy holidays to all of you, regardless of which creed or belief you follow. To me, the holidays have always been about sharing camaraderie, fellowship, faith, and experiences with those you care about. You'll find that this can be passed on into the dungeon as well, and into the role-playing games that you may play with your friends. Typically in my dungeon, we always have one particular session that's set aside for the holiday season, in which my players and I bring food to the table and we share an experience that way, and oftentimes I will throw in an encounter that is themed to the holiday. Of course, tomorrow being my game session, I have everything prepared for just that occasion. And in fact, if you go to my channel, you may find a little treat to you in the form of a poem that I wrote many years ago that I have read and performed for your enjoyment, called "'Twas the Gaming Night Before Christmas." I hope you enjoy it. However, what we're going to be talking about today is again in reference to the training regimen that we have already begun with level 10. Here at level 11, this is going to be a little bit of a treat for you if you are an inexperienced gamer, about something that a lot of game manuals do not suggest or recommend. It is through experience and training and forethought that this particular gift becomes very handy. This session, we will examine Session 0, what it means, and how it can help you in your games. So, Level 11, Session 0. So, what is Session 0? When a person begins a campaign, a lot of times what flashes through their mind is immediately jumping into the game, having the players have their characters and leap into an adventure. Many times, if a person is to do this, they may find the results are not immediately what they were dreaming of. And there's a particular reason for this. You see, in any group of players that you may have, it's very rare when all of them are of the same mind. Oftentimes, people can have very different ideas about what is involved in a particular game, and their characters may reflect that. If you go online in any degree, you can certainly search out bad character concepts. Almost every single one of those existed because there was no Session 0 that was in play in that particular campaign. Now, Session 0 is nothing more nor nothing less than taking one session at the beginning, the very start of your campaign, and ensuring that your players understand the game that they're about to get into. It's a time for bringing up rules, and any new rules that you may be bringing into play, any house rules that you intend to use for the campaign, so that the players have a sufficient amount of time to grasp and absorb those rules as they prepare to play your game. It's the time where you explain to the players what is on your mind, what kind of game it's going to be. So, for example, if you want to have a game that's set in World War II, one of your player characters doesn't roll up as an elven archer. If you laugh at this, I assure you, at somebody's table, this has happened. So, with a Session 0, you can take a moment to guide your players into the world that you wish to set up. It's a good session for dialogue between players and characters. If they have any questions about the system or any questions about your world, it's a good time to fill them in on those details. This allows you to take some inspiration from them. If they have some ideas and you want to crib them, it's a good time. Another useful opportunity you have with Session 0 is to express and explain the style that you want to use in a particular game, especially if your players come in with an expectation of a particular style that you're known for. If you want to try something different, you might want to explain that to them. A game master who is very heavy on combat, for example, and wants to try a more narrative, thought-out approach rather than a whirlwind of blood and death and destruction, should probably give his players fair warning that there's going to be a style change so that their characters aren't stuck with a bunch of less useful combat skills and instead have an opportunity of making characters that will be germane to the adventure at hand. So, the very first is communication. It's very important. And Session 0 is a great time for that. By this point, the Game Master should understand the rules to a point. You don't have to have everything memorized, but you should have a basic knowledge of how the game works so that when your players have questions, you can fill in those details. Also, because since you're not playing, you're not holding up gameplay by looking through the rules and ensuring that you have everything set. Also, Session 0 is also wonderful to use as a time for everybody to make characters together. Some people have a habit of allowing their players to go off and make characters on their own, which can be fine. It may work just fine, just perfectly. However, it is also quite possible that when those players go off, and I'm not going to level any, suspicions on, say, cheating. If, say, there's dice rolling involved, and a character comes in, they have a stack of papers that have all been used up, but they finally managed to roll that character that has the absolute best stats in every score, to show that they've rolled that actual character true by showing you the stacks and stacks of papers. Some games, that may have happened. There are horror stories that float around between game masters about just such an exercise. And nobody wants to have to tell that player, that character just doesn't fit into the game, he doesn't fit with the other characters, roll another one. It's an ugly situation to catch yourself in. If you make your characters on Session 0, that way you can be there, you can supervise, and everything can go just fine. Hopefully. It's also a good time to find out how your players are going to work together. For instance, if you have one person who's rather bossy and expects to be the leader, that's a good time for either the rest of the party to accept that person as an alpha and make characters and work towards supporting each other and the alpha, or to let that person know that that's not going to work, or somebody else wants to be a leader and they need to step back for the session. Because there's no game going on to break up the flow with that kind of exercise, that is a useful time to set that pecking order or to establish what will go and what will not work in a particular unit or group, party, what have you. Also, as a game master, when you supervise how your players are making their characters and how they form the makeup of the group, that can oftentimes give you, since you're not playing in that session, it gives you a time until the next session that you can prepare and fine-tune that first adventure, that first encounter, that module for your group. Keeping in mind their strengths, their weaknesses, what interests them, what supports their background, weaving in elements of their characters into the story at hand so that it has more personal impact for those characters. And we'll describe all of that in the next level of the dungeon. But it can be a very useful tool for the Game Master to be on hand so that you can hear how your players want to be engaged into your story. A lot of times, having them create a background for their character and observing their actions, their behaviors, and what their interests are will allow you to immediately begin fine-tuning your adventure. Now, if you're running a module or you have some, pre-created town or setting for the characters, it's a good idea by Session 0 to understand that setting as well as you reasonably can. You don't have to be up to playing speed, but you should at least be able to give a good thumbnail sketch to the players when they ask questions. If you don't have that kind of a grasp, you are not playing, so it is not breaking up your game flow to be able to look up details, or maybe to make up something on the fly, write down notes for yourself so that you can begin building your world, your campaign, your scenario, even as session 0 is going on. So, it helps a little bit for creating your opening cast, and also for setting the opening act for your characters. Now, I generally enjoy watching the party building during session 0, watching the players determine what they're going to be playing. And a lot of times, if you let them all be in the same room when they're making their characters, you will hear people talking about which kind of characters they intend to play. Usually one person will jump out and say, I want to play this. Then the rest of them adjust their expectations accordingly. It can lead to a player or two feeling shoehorned into playing a class that they may not have been interested in initially. For instance, in the classic days of Dungeons & Dragons that I cut my teeth on, I was late to the group. When I showed up to the group, I was handed a cleric, because it was what the group needed. They didn't have very much healing. And at low levels in Dungeons & Dragons, I didn't have a lot to give them, but it was enough. Nobody really died on my watch, so I guess I did a good enough job. However, I also learned by being in the back and letting more dynamic characters do most of the things. My character couldn't influence battles directly very often. I was at best a support character who did his best to try to make sure that everybody stayed alive and everybody stayed as effective as possible. I was inexperienced as a player, so the group didn't listen to me. I wasn't the leader by any stretch of the imagination. However, I was a core that the rest of the group knew that they could retreat to get support, to get healing when they needed it, and to get the kind of things that their characters needed statistically, even if I wasn't giving them the best advice, despite the wisdom of my character, or I made a few mistakes here and there, being a rookie at the whole thing. So, if those people who are last to pick the characters they choose end up getting buttonholed into support characters, or maybe something that they weren't interested in, I will be giving advice on how to tune your campaign so that, say, a group in original Dungeons and Dragons without a healer certainly could be in a good deal of trouble. But if you make sure that the healing potions come in thick and fast as rewards for their adventures and are constantly held out for them as a carrot to make them advance, the need for a cleric becomes a little bit less. You have ways of mitigating class requirements for the balance of a party. So generally, I try to encourage people to play the characters they want to play. Now, an artificial way of doing this is to not let the players commiserate when it comes to making up the characters and choosing the characters. You could do this by isolating them within the building as they make up their characters. Another thing that I've done is just to enforce silence, make them write down the race and class that they're interested in, or tribe and auspice, or whatever template or description basically allows them to make up their character. And then once they get to the table, everything is revealed, and you find out if you have an entire group full of warriors that are just going to throw away magic and healing and just barrel through things. It can be very liberating knowing that everybody is playing the kind of character they want to play. On the other hand, balance does become an issue. You may find yourself having to compensate because the player's choices weren't completely copacetic to having a well-balanced party that can tackle a wider range of threats. This may or may not work out. It may stretch out your skills a little bit early, but it can lead to some very interesting scenarios. So, both avenues are particularly valid in this case in a session 0 setting, and also giving people the opportunity to change out characters if things aren't working down the road is certainly another option a good game master will allow. So, Making characters on your session 0 can be a wonderful exercise. It's a good group building thing, and it gives you a hand to make sure the characters are balanced and fair. I would also generally recommend that you try to, as much as possible, put on an air that people can entertain themselves in a kind of a more open social environment for that. Don't rush. Have good music on that facilitates things but doesn't distract. Allow players to talk together. It's a social thing. For example, if they want to work out that their characters are brothers, or brother sister, or something like that, that can lead to a dynamic player bond cohesion that helps you to get the group together in session 1. Or it can be an interesting thing that allows for good role-playing down the road as those characters banter or put priority over their blood relatives to their survival and keeping your familial unit intact. These are all different options that Session 0 gives you the chance to do. So, after you've got the characters created and the players are all on the same page, you have bypassed many of the problems that people who run without Session 0 have. Characters that are all out of proportion, that don't necessarily work well together, or may completely contrast in a negative way. Somebody making an assassin in a group that has a paladin. Having people who are of, I won't say incompatible, a good game master can work around almost any seeming obstacle, but characters that make your job more difficult. I'm not saying that as a game master you should always get what you want, but if the players are making your job difficult, then something is probably needs correction. So, and in addition, your players may come into things more prepared and more ready for Session 1. I will also say that at Session 0, it's a good idea to have things like handouts. Give the players something that they can look at and review until the time to Session 1. If you give them a primer on the world, if they're going into a new world, especially if it's something that you created they might not be familiar with. Having a little cheat sheet with all the pertinent rules that they may find themselves up against again and again and again. For example, the core combat rules, the methods that you use to employ combat, both maybe attacking and maybe defending, the options. The different options that each character has in combat, and a little summary of what they do and why you would want to use them. If you're going into a new system, these kind of things can be really useful because on that first day, you break into a combat and they don't look panicked. They just look at your cheat sheet, decide what their options are, and go on from there. Now, they won't always stick to those options. There's always gray areas between these set things that people can do. But at least you're giving them all the tools that they need to go into your first session and ready to go. This also gives you an opportunity to lay down your first hooks and seeds. A hook is a bit of information or a particular character's interaction that draws a player towards something that you intend. So, for example, if a knight is told that a servant of his liege lord wants him to go to a particular town to check on some unrest, that's a hook, a very strong hook, as there's negative consequences to not doing what your lord wants you to do as a knight. It's a very strong hook to the point of almost, holding a plot stick up and threatening to beat them with it if they don't do as you ask, but there's plenty of other avenues for that. You'll also seed more through Session 1 and others, but it's not a bad thing to give the players things to set their imaginations on so that they can look forward to and work towards some of the goals, perhaps that you don't have to keep seeding extra hooks to draw them along. The first one that gets their attention may be enough. A seed is setting up a scenario that the players might interact with, but doesn't go seeking them out. For instance, putting a backdrop of a large dungeon close to their starting city is a seed more so than a hook. The players may at some point be asked to go and get something out of that dungeon. That's a hook. Just the fact that it's there, and if the players rummage around and say, well, we're looking for adventure, somebody might casually mention, well, there happens to be a dungeon outside of town that needs to be cleared out every now and again. And by putting those kind of seeds into your world, they can grow into some fruit. That down the road, you have a ready side quest or something that your players can, on their own initiative, go off and do and feel good about having some actual license in what's going on in the storyline. This may not be appropriate to what you're doing. If you're just intending to run a simple module, or you really don't have those kind of aspirations, say you want to run a railroady type storyline where the players are step by step going through different adventures and scenarios, then that may not be something that you need. But it remains a useful time to put something like that into your session 0. I also would say that if you want to wow players, especially if you have a lot of new players, session 0 is a good time to do it. If you have any kind of an effect or maybe a prop or two that you want to throw in to let your players know that these are kind of things that you always could keep in your back pocket to throw out to spice up a particular scenario, well, session 0 is not a bad time to spring it on them. It maintains their interest and keeps up their sense of wonder at what you're going to be bringing out next. And that's not a bad thing. So the final part that I would hold out as an option for session 0. This is something that I learned from playing World of Darkness games from White Wolf. And my session 0s oftentimes run with the firsting of a character. For instance, the embrace of a vampire, that time when they shift from mortal form to a vampire. It's a defining moment for every character. Now, some games will gloss over that. Your group may already be established vampires, but for somebody who's never played it, it's a huge disservice in my mind not to give them their first embrace in a session 0 like situation, where the and again too, when you're making up characters, you want the players to make the characters in the fashion that you're looking for. And when I play World of Darkness and I run a game, my first thing is I tell the players, make humans first. Don't make super werewolves. Make characters that have a reason, a purpose for being. Give them motivations, give them goals, give them a life of their own. And then we'll turn those people into werewolves and vampires and such. Now, generally, I have them make the characters halfway through, and then the events happen that transform them. If it's a vampire, they meet their sire, either in, maybe a random act of violence, perhaps. Maybe it's the sire was hunting them down and wanting to make them into their child. If it's werewolf, it's time to break out the kid gloves, burn them in a fire. You want them to get bloody. You want them to set the stage for what that game is going to be. And when I run werewolf, it is a whirlwind, a maelstrom of blood. And you have werewolves. There's nothing that's going to be subtle about them rampaging and raging out. And in those kind of games, you want to drive home that sense of personal horror. You want to set the tone for how your game is going to be. So, when somebody turns werewolf, usually it means that there's going to be a pile of bodies, and they may get their first contacts that bring them into the awakened world. In a game like Mage, for instance, they'll happen on their powers, and then their society will come in and teach them the ropes. Now, the actual, melding of them into a group is not as individual of a moment, and that is often best left for session 1. But all the individual stuff, that's good session 0 fodder, especially if you have left yourself a fair amount of time at the end and you're not rushing through these. Now, this works for other games other than the World of Darkness as well, especially if you come to the table knowing your world that you're going to be playing in and helping players to set up backgrounds for their characters. Taking them off to the side, making sure that that background is unique to that character can be invaluable. It also gives you an enormous advantage when making your campaign world come to life if you are making a full campaign world, because you can start immediately seeding in hooks and seeds, sprinkling them liberally, and the players will be the ones who will be giving you that. As they come up with their background, you can stitch it into your world and take advantage of all the things that they have offered you in terms of what they foresaw of their backgrounds of their characters. They give you things that matter to their characters. And after all, the easiest way to motivate characters is to either threaten or do something that involves what they cherish. Be it wealth, be it family, be it prestige, be it honor. These are all things that the player's background gives to us as game masters to help motivate and guide the players. Why I say it's an individual effort is so that other players can't necessarily taint what an individual character is interested in. Those interests can vary greatly. Sometimes, though, they tend to merge. Again, I gave you the example before of two players who wanted their characters to be brother and sister. Well, then obviously those backgrounds are going to be very close. And those two characters, much like their two players, will have had all these shared experiences. So those two players should be building those shared experiences in the background together and working with the game master. But if they don't have that kind of background, then they perhaps should be allowed to make that background and isolated from the other players. Now, that being said, again, session 0, you're not actually playing. So you could take a step back, look at, say, the brother-sister combo that you don't have to worry about getting together as a group because you already have their moment planned out, how they're going to begin on this life of adventure that you're creating. As far as the other groups, the other players that are involved in your group, this gives you an opportunity as their backgrounds form to put 10 pegs in that are going to bring those characters together. You can make something that's not as cliched as you all meet in a bar, decide that you're adventurers, and decide that you're going to risk your lives with each other. It's cliched, and it seems a bit, well, at the very least contrived, simply because it's hard to put your trust. Imagine put yourself in the shoes of an armorless wizard, for instance. You're going to trust, as exotic as some of the other characters may be, you're going to trust them with your very feeble flesh and all of your massive potential for power. A lot of times, when you have the opportunity at session 0 to begin weaving together the threads that are going to bind these characters, perhaps maybe it's childhood rivalries and they suddenly realize they had more in common than they realized. Or maybe, one person is the smith's apprentice, and even though he's a bit slow, he's huge and strong, and everybody likes him because he's a nice guy. He makes them toys or something like that. Those are the kind of bonds that you can use so that when session 1 comes around, you don't have to have a chance encounter that makes the group work. You can build those bonds initially so that they have reason to work as a cohesive unit together. Or that they have different fractures that are already built into their relationship so that you can have role-playing experiences as those fractures are knit, as they pull apart from each other. It can fuel banter. It can fuel drama and sometimes tension, as long as it doesn't detract from the game. That can be a real strength of the story. Rarely do people in an adventuring party always agree with everything the others do, and it would kind of be boring. The whole reason that you have multiple players in a role-playing group commonly is that you have those different perspectives to play off of each other. And when you blend the backgrounds together and you give people reasons to be, say, competing with each other, or maybe jealous of one or another, resolving that all in session 0 frees up your session 1 to cover the actual let's get you into an adventure and let's get this started. So, Those, as I see it, are all the strengths that you get from having a good, solid session zero. It may seem like it's a throwaway thing because you don't actually start playing. It's rarely worth experience, although I do like to throw a few little bonuses in for people who show up for session zero. Maybe a minor ability or a trinket that they get to start out with. Maybe if they come up with a really good background, I'll reward them with something. Maybe some extra money so they can afford a little bit better armor, or maybe a promissory note for something useful down the road. Maybe just even a common healing potion or one of those little baubles of things that always get used up, but it's nice to have when you have it. So, that's how my session zeros generally tend to run. There's communication between the game master and the players. There's education, teaching them the rules or teaching them anything new that the game is going to involve. Making up the characters so that they're the best quality characters that you can have when you get ready to start your game. And then finally, being in the position that you can put together the party and weave them together so that they can function great right out of the gate. Or maybe, function in a way that gives the characters meaning, gives those separations meaning. That's session zero. It's a useful tool for any game master. It's darn near essential for some, especially more narrative-driven adventures. But it's something that every single game master has in their toolbox, unless you're under a real time crunch, like, say, a one-shot convention game. But it is a useful luxury to take advantage of, and it almost always makes your campaign better. So, now that we've gone through our own little session, perhaps you're ready for the rewards. So, here we are at the treasure hoard, and I'm feeling rather festive today. Got done wrapping family's presents, and been talking about seasonal things and reading my poem again. And one of the things that reminds me of is something that some game masters tend to lose sight of, and something that I would encourage you never to let happen. Representative of that, I've got something that I picked up at an old Gen Con back in the 90s. It's a nice looking bottle. It's got a cool stopper on it. This has not been opened in, since the 90s. Never put anything into it. I just thought it was really cool, and I always try to walk away from any convention I go to with something in my hand. I don't know why this spoke to me, but the label is pretty. It reads, Gamer's Grog, an invigorating blend of +5 to +12 ingredients, adds strength, longevity, and dexterity to any character. From the Hack and Slash Brewing Company, Muncie, Indiana, imported and distributed by Klein's Bottling Company, Anson, Missouri. The reference to +12 and Muncie, Indiana makes me think of Knights of the Dinner Table, which takes place in Muncie, Indiana, and the character Dave's, the player characters of Dave, one of the characters in the story, always wields a +12 Hackmaster sword. It's the most powerful weapon in the game, and he has one. So I think this is somehow tied into the Knights of the Dinner Table and the guys at Kenzer and Company. Jolly Blackburn's creations, I don't know, probably at least inspired it. So anyhow, why this fake bottle of grog? One of the things that can happen in a game is you can get so wrapped up in session after session after session of action, suspense, especially in campaigns that are centered around things like dungeon crawls, that a lot of times you have characters who have gone through the equivalent of a massive land war, and there's no release. These characters would go insane from the sheer amount of threats and reality-altering opposition that they face. But because they're characters played for the amusement of the players, they just go back in and continue to try their quest for whatever interests them. Experience, power, wealth, justice, what have you. What that bottle, I hope, represents is the need for your characters to sometimes just cut loose and be entertained. Do things outside of going on the dungeon or going on the quest. As a game master, you oftentimes have a need to tell your story to such extent that you leave out those little things that can really help to flesh out character and give the characters another kind of reward than just treasure and loot. You can give them experiences that can help to bond the party and allow them to tell some of their own stories on their own terms. That can be something as simple as a pub crawl, characters going into a tavern and having their own entertainments. That can be also as interesting as a massive shopping trip that you devote an entire session for. The players getting to explore a city or a space station, looking for particular items that they may not have found on their adventures, recouping losses on ammunition, supplies, sometimes just by giving your players an opportunity to take a breath and letting those characters take off some of the stress can lead to some enormously entertaining sessions. I would say probably that almost all of my most memorable character experiences did not happen in dungeons. They mostly happened on events that either came out of the blue as not a pre-planned encounter, but something that we just ended up reacting to and having a role-playing session of, something that was impromptu that our characters made up. For instance, I had a good character moment with a bard that I created with my first group when I went to college. Being a bard in 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons was disappointing, especially depending on if your dungeon master really restricted the spells you could use and never gave you attack type spells because you're a bard. Well, at one point the group was attacked by a spell-casting monster, and it was getting away, and I dove and rolled a natural 20 and tackled it out of a window, killed it, took some damage, but I looked awesome. I still remember that, despite the fact that happened back in 1993. A long, long time ago. And it's one of the things I remember about my character, Salen von Kells, Bard Extraordinaire. Didn't happen because we were in a dungeon and I did something particularly awesome. Salen did some fun things, but I still remember taking out that spellcaster who had attacked our party, and I managed to land a killing blow for a change, which didn't happen very often with him. So, again, just kind of a recommendation to make sure that even if you're playing something particularly grim, like Warhammer 40k game or Call of Cthulhu or something, the contrast that you can get from having something that's actually lighthearted, that is more comedy based rather than grim and dark and depressing and scary, can make all the difference and really heightens or highlights the depths by giving you a higher peak to descend to or from. So that's my little bit of treasure and experience that I like to pass on to you. The importance of having those kind of game-shaking reset buttons for your characters. So, hope that helps. In addition to that, I think you've earned 12 Lair points tonight. Good session, I think. In addition, I would also like to give you this sack I recently found. It's a little bloody, but it's fine. Smells a little bit like orc. Orc and hellhound. What do you do? The inside, however, is filled with 10 small silvery balls of glass. Perfectly shiny, perfectly round. No, they're not ornaments. They don't have a little thing to hang on your tree or anything. They're just round silver balls. They're extremely lightweight. They feel very, very fragile. I don't have any use for them, but perhaps you'll find a use for them next time you see me. Make sure you ask about your 10 silver shiny balls, and I'll have an answer for you. So, this is OmnusI, once again, Lair of OmnusI, wishing you very happy holidays, and if you're catching this after the holidays, I'm wishing you safe travels. Thank you, and farewell.